Hello, my name is Emily Counts, and I'm going to be presenting on how to teach reading the Montessori way. Please grab a pen and paper for this talk, or print out the provided handout and take some notes. I am a trained Montessori guide, and I've done all kinds of things before becoming a teacher. I'm an Air Force veteran. I have a degree in space science. I've worked at NASA, and currently I live on a farm on the eastern shore of Virginia. I'm a mother to a little boy who's not quite a year old, and I'm opening a private elementary school as we speak. I make Montessori materials for my classroom, and I share those with other teachers and homeschoolers like you. I've got my website here if you want to see some of the materials I've made or read up on the blog. But the reason I'm at the conference today is because I'm the author of the Rhyme and Reason reading program. I created this program because I need a program that aligned with Montessori principles and evidence-based reading instruction, which is probably similar to your needs. And there wasn't a ready-made program that already existed. There were great linguistic phonics programs that followed evidence-based reading instruction. These were set for whole group or remedial settings. And there were programs designed and targeted for Montessori classrooms, but I found that these failed on most evidence-based practices. Writing this book was very illuminating. I immersed myself in evidence for several years and tested the practices in my classrooms with extraordinary results. Every student in all of my classes has learned to read. I feel confident in explaining what does and does not align with the original Montessori method of reading instruction, and I feel confident explaining what does and doesn't align with the science of reading. I'm going to provide resources for you to learn all about what I learned about at the end of the presentation. Let's start with a bit of theory. What is a writing system? This was one of the fundamental questions I needed to answer to create my reading program. Before putting text in front of a child and teaching them to read, I need to understand what they were reading at a really fundamental level. Spoken language is innate. As humans, we're hardwired to learn how to speak. Humans spoke for hundreds of thousands of years before anything was ever written down. Writing is an optional expansion pack. It is not innate. There's no reading part of the brain. A writing system is an invention for us to transmit language over space and time. We're no longer limited by spatial or temporal proximity. We can read Aristotle's works. I can write to my friend in Japan. Well before electronic transmission and recordings like this, we had written books and letters. The invention of writing is up there with fire and farming in terms of significance for all of humanity. A writing system is a code with a systematic relationship between units of sound and visual symbols. All writing systems are a code. All codes are reversible. Now, write this down, highlight it, get a tattoo. Spelling is encoding, reading is decoding. In order for all students to become successful readers, they must become code breakers. We must teach them how our English code really works, how we encode our sounds, one sound at a time, and decode our letters one at a time. Especially at the beginning, we ought to take great care to teach them the proper strategies for our English code and not confuse them with methods that fail. This is the nation's report card for American public schools for the past 30 years. Here, we see about 66% of children tested below basic. This means 2 out of 3 children cannot read age-appropriate text for understanding. As homeschoolers, you might think this does not apply to you, but the case I want to make transcends government school systems. I believe these schools have poor reading outcomes because of the method they're choosing. And as a homeschooler, you may be inadvertently choosing those same methods, which means you'll get the same results. One interpretation of these results is that 2 out of 3 children have some kind of random biological deficiency that causes reading difficulty. If this were true, we would expect to see these same random biological differences in all countries across different languages. We would expect to see 2 out of 3 children be illiterate worldwide. But this is not what we see. Illiteracy clusters by language. Countries with simple writing systems like Korea, Italy, Sweden, Austria, Germany, and Spain have literacy rates at or above 98%. English, with its complicated writing system, is the problem. Only English-speaking countries have spelling bees. The difficulty of teaching a highly complex writing system is why our children cannot read. What's so bad about English? Because the English language and its writing system have been repeatedly assaulted by foreign languages over the centuries, it is no exaggeration to say that modern English is one of the most complicated writing systems in existence. Spoken English has a lot of really nice features, which is why it's adopted in many countries, but our written language has very few nice features. English is layered with 5 different languages that have each maintained their original spelling system: Anglo-Saxon, Danish, Norman French, Latin, and Greek. The result is an exceptionally expressive spoken language with an exceptionally complicated writing system. There are only 26 letter symbols in the alphabet to represent our 40 sounds. English has many ways to write a sound called spelling alternatives. Here we have bake, vein, main, apron, day, Sunday, straight, gauge, debut, sleigh, they, ballet, Pompeii. All of those words had the A sound, and not a single one was spelled the same way. English has many ways to read a spelling called code overlaps. Here we have bead, bread, break, yeah, bureaucrat, beauty, and plateau. Each of these have the same spelling pattern, but none of them are pronounced the same way. English spelling often honors etymology, not phonics. When words are loaned from other languages, we maintain the original foreign writing system or give it a foreignese spelling instead of giving words a standard English spelling. So we have sushi, bow, déjà vu, hors d'oeuvres, spaghetti, zeitgeist, subpoena, quesadilla, and photograph. Those are all words that we've directly loaned from other languages. English spelling units not only represent sounds, but also meaning. A great example of this is our past tense suffix ed. It's spelled the same, even though it's pronounced 3 different ways: skipped, planned, planted. Throughout this presentation, I want to ground us and realign our practices with the original Montessori method and see how the science of reading can bolster our practices. And this raises a good question. What does it mean to be Montessori? Have you ever typed Montessori into Amazon or eBay? You get all kinds of things that are labeled Montessori. Here we have a musical ducks roller coaster, or a kid's pounding toy, perhaps pink unicorn animal. My favorite, of course, is the light wooden machine gun. That's particularly Montessori, isn't it? These are, of course, the most ridiculous items I could find on eBay. But overall, you'll get a ton of things that are wood, or sensory play, or hands-on activities. There's a really just general aesthetic that looks Montessori. But none of these things are at the heart of Montessori education. To the untrained eye, the toy on the left looks Montessori. I could see my grandmother getting this for my son because it's wood and low tech. I'm not even saying this toy is bad. It's very tasteful, but it's not Montessori. It's not real. The girl on the right with her real banana is really Montessori because she's doing work that satisfies her developmental needs. And that's the point. We're satisfying the child's developmental needs. For clarity, I'm going to review the original Montessori method of reading instruction to make sure we're all on the same page. Maria Montessori wrote about her reading program in her book, The Montessori Method, which was later renamed The Discovery of the Child. I want to point out that this book is a translation. It was originally written in Italian, so she is describing reading instruction for the Italian language. Italian is a much simpler code than English, so this difference is really quite important, unlike translations of math or geometry instruction where the language doesn't change the content. Her original method was not designed to teach English-speaking students how to read. She says in this book that she actually couldn't figure out how to teach English because our writing system is so complicated. So we need to make modifications to her program to cope with the complexities of English, and I have some ideas about how to do that. Italian has 21 letters and 28 sounds. It uses a few multi-letter combinations to spell some sounds, like ch, spelled C-I, and accent marks to indicate different vowel sounds. Italian is what we call a transparent language. There is one way to write each sound and one way to read each letter, with very few exceptions. So is always spelled M, and M is always read m. We've already reviewed that English does not behave this way at all. I'm guessing most of you have heard that the Montessori method teaches writing before teaching reading. But I want to draw your attention to the particular aspect of writing that makes this method so effective. Her method taught spelling before teaching reading. She taught encoding before teaching decoding. Refer to your tattoo. Spelling is just transcribing spoken language into written symbols. We are not talking about correct spelling. With the subtle shift in mind, let's quickly review the method and materials. We have the sandpaper letters. The child traces the symbol while saying the sound it represents. So while they trace the M symbol. We're going to connect the symbol and sound with kinesthetic, auditory, and visual memory, making a very strong neural connection. Then we can move to the movable alphabet, which is used to spell out words before a pen is mastered. So you'll think of something, say the word, mano, that's the Italian word for hand, segment the sounds, a, n, o, and write the symbol that represents each sound. In this case, you're writing with the movable alphabet. Spelling and reading are inverse operations. With practice, writing and spelling words lets you recognize the same symbols in reading. You'll see the word and identify the symbols. You identify which sound is associated with the symbol, o, and you blend those sounds together, mano. The connection between sound and symbol automatically becomes bidirectional. This is the explosion of reading that she talks about. In The Discovery of the Child, there's this really good quote, and I'm going to read it to you. Experience has shown us that beginning from the moment when a child writes, it takes an average of 15 days to pass from this lower form of activity, writing, to the higher one of reading. Only 2 weeks after mastering spelling with the sandpaper letters and movable alphabet, her children became readers. Her method of reading instruction is what brought her and her method international fame. It wasn't the materials, it wasn't the math, it was her method of reading. And I would really like us to just get back to it because it's so good. The brilliance of this method is that it leans on what the child has already mastered, spoken language. By the age of 6, a child knows around 15,000 words, which is roughly the same number of words that Shakespeare used in all of his collected works. We are starting from a position of strength. Because her method leaned on what the child already knew how to speak, her method let children teach themselves. The child only has to learn what symbols are needed to represent the sounds in the words they already know. That's all well and good that we're, going to use the Montessori method, but that's like 100 years old. We've learned a lot about cognitive science and have a body of research that points to the best practices. How does the Montessori method hold up? With several decades of research, we can say with confidence that the original Montessori method of reading instruction aligns nearly perfectly with cognitive research and clinical trials. In other words, the Montessori method of reading is evidence-based reading instruction. And this makes sense Maria Montessori was first and foremost a scientist. She developed hypotheses about how children learn and develop. She tested these hypotheses in her class, discovering what was effective instruction and what was not. She did original research, and to this day, her original method is cited frequently in modern literature. Now, I'm going to go through each of the points on this slide in detail with real examples for the rest of the talk. I'm going to show you things that are marketed as science of reading or as Montessori, and I'll show you how they may not actually be meeting our child's development, our children's developmental needs. Referring back to the wooden machine gun labeled Montessori, in the realm of reading, we have the same problem. But because reading is conceptual, not physical like those toys, it's actually much more difficult to spot when something is missing the mark. Don't be led astray by cursive, color-coded vowels and consonants, wood, or manipulative cards. I don't believe that the people who make these materials have ill intentions. I think they're really good people who really want to help children succeed and become readers and foster a love of literature. I've blocked out all the brand names and tried to anonymize photos because this is about methods, not creators. The good news is I'm going to tell you that reading instruction is way less complicated than the internet or eBay wants you to think. You can deliver high-quality, evidence-based reading instruction with nothing more than a pencil, paper, and a quality teacher guidebook. In an effort to make this presentation as practical as possible, the format for the rest of the talk is a this, not that format. At the end, I'm going to point you to some books where you can learn more and go in depth on theory and evidence, but I'm not going to do that here. Some of these examples are really tricky to spot. Some practices are worse than others. Some are neutral. I want to say as a final disclaimer, most children will learn to read if they are given any kind of phonics instruction, even the bad kinds that I talk about in this presentation. About 2 out of 3 students will learn to read with any kind of phonics instruction. My aim is to move most to all. I have a deeply personal motive to ensure that every child learns to read. And you, as someone educating your own child, you do too. So if I point out an activity that you've been doing, please don't feel bad. I'm not trying to say you're bad. You're not bad. I'm trying to help. Let's go. There are 2 endpoints to a writing code. One is the spoken word, and the other are written letters. The end goal is to have bidirectionality where you can encode and decode effortlessly. Speech-to-print instruction is just another way of saying we're teaching writing before we teach reading. My husband wanted me to call this presentation Reading in One Lesson after the Henry Hazlitt book, Economics in One Lesson. So here's the lesson. Teach from speech to print. Memento style, you can put this next to your other tattoo. I think you can trace most missteps in reading instruction from a misunderstanding and misapplication of this idea. A misunderstanding of the speech sounds in our code of English, and a misunderstanding of how we turn sounds into letters. In speech-to-print instruction, we're anchoring our instruction on the stable part of the language that the child has already mastered. Every English word is made up of some combination of a mere 40 phonemes, mere 40 sounds. And these sounds are fixed and not negotiable. You can spell things with a lot of creative flair, but you cannot deviate very far from the sounds of your language before you aren't understood. We all know the 26 letters that English has, and we reuse them in different combinations to represent sounds. There are between 280 to 500 spelling patterns in English, with all of the problems I mentioned on the previous slides. Speech to print is conceptually easier for the child. It's developmentally appropriate. Just like the golden beads are a concrete and the numbers are an abstract representation of quantity, spoken language is concrete, and the written symbol is an abstract representation of the sounds. So here we go. Do this. This is the core lesson that you need to know to teach children to read. Here we go. We're going to say a word. Say rug. This can be prompted by a picture, a small object, or the child's own words. Break apart the sounds. G. Find the symbol for each sound. G. And then read back what you've written. The control of error is built in. The child knows what word they're trying to spell. And that's it. That's reading in one lesson. Teach from speech to print. The opposite direction is what you're going to see in most other reading instruction. It teaches from print to speech. This is decoding first. And you can understand why. You're trying to teach the child to read, show them words, sound out the letters. But that's starting with the abstraction, the symbols, and connecting it to the concrete, which is much harder. It's not developmentally appropriate. This is like starting with the written numbers and then showing them the golden beads. Eventually, this link is bidirectional, but at the beginning, we start with the concrete and move to the abstract. In print-to-speech instruction, children are told that letters make or say sounds, or sometimes mysteriously silent. In class, the child might hear the confusing explanation in the word home. H says M says E is silent, and O says its name. As reading instruction progresses, letters make more and more sounds. In the word mad, A says ah, but in the word maple, A says A, but in the word was, A says and so on. In the classic example, OUGH makes 9 sounds, as in thought, though, through, bow, rough, trough, thorough, hiccup. None of those sounds is aug, the way you think it might be said. For print to sound decoding, you're starting with our notoriously inconsistent writing system. And if we teach each of those 280 spellings that make sounds like OUGH did in this example, it gives children the impression that these symbols can represent any sound, and that trying to learn all the sounds that letters make, and when they decide to make one sound instead of another, is an impossible task. Letters do not make sounds. People do. If we're teaching from speech to print, then the opposite is what we don't want to do. Decoding is very cognitively taxing. There are a lot of moving pieces to hold on to. The child has to recognize groups of letters, recall the sound that's represented, mentally hold on to all the sounds as they repeat the process for the rest of the word, and then blend the sounds together and hopefully recognize the sounds as a word. If not, then they have to swap out sounds until it becomes a word. I want you to take a look at this word list. These are nonsense words. I made them up. And try to imagine yourself as an emergent reader, looking at these unfamiliar words, because to an emergent reader, all words are unfamiliar. I want you to really notice your mental processes as you try it out. I'll give you a moment. You can pause the video. Let's see if you read these words the same. I have condensing, obster, accommodate, and succinct. That was probably a little tricky. Did you notice your mental processes? You have an advantage because you've seen and read a billion words and discovered the patterns of English. The emergent reader has not. Moving on to point 2. Do not memorize words as a whole. This is a prohibition on sight words. The first thing to define is what a sight word is. The definition I'm using comes from, I think, sightwords.com. And a sight word is a high-frequency word that should be recognized on sight. These are memorized visually and not sounded out. A popular list of many is the Dolch word list. Edward Dolch was a look-say proponent of the 1930s and 40s. Look-say is a discredited method of reading instruction, has been shown to be actively harmful if your goal is to teach children to read. The more time that is spent memorizing words as a whole, the worse reading outcomes are. These are laundry care symbols. Do you recognize a dry clean reduced moisture? If you wanted to represent all of the words you know with a single symbol, you would need to memorize this set 700 times over. What do you do when you come to a new symbol? How do you connect that visual shape to the language you speak? It's not possible to sound these out, and you have to be told by someone else what it means or guess. And this is why memorizing sight words as a whole is such a poor strategy for children. We want to avoid this strategy completely. In my book, I teach you how to present sight words without memorizing. These Dolch word lists have the 100, 200, 1,000 most common words in English. And the rationale from Edward Dolch is that if you memorize these words, then you can read somewhere between 50 to 70% of the words on any given page. He believed that this was a fast way to get children reading, and we could skip the boring phonics and get right to the good stuff. But the child isn't really reading. Remember, reading is decoding. What the child is actually doing is guessing 50 to 70% of the words on any given page, because the child doesn't have a sounding out strategy for those words. I pulled a couple words from the Dolch word list, and I want to show you here how I would break them up for the child. We do have words in English that are irregularly spelled, and they're going to require specific instruction for the child to learn how to read them. But what we're going to do is teach them exactly the same way for an irregular word as a regular word. That this is how you spell each sound. So I have here she. That's two sounds. Sh, e. We spell sh, sh, and e, the letter e. I wouldn't use letter names, but I'm going to use them for you. We have here who. This is oo, is spelled W-H. Oo is spelled O. There's no silent W. It's spelled W-H. And we would repeat this for any irregular word that they come across. This strategy is the strategy for all words. There's no special group of words. So we're not going to be memorizing words as a whole. Do not use word shapes. These are explicitly visual memorizations for whole words. It's explicitly orienting the child towards the shape of the word, not the letters within the word and not the sounds that those letters represent. We're not going to use flashcards. This is print to speech and memorizing words as a whole. And we don't match whole words to pictures for a spelling exercise, because it's not spelling. And this encourages thinking of the word as a picture and makes the activity a picture-to-picture matching activity. To an emergent reader, these are laundry care symbols. So they're matching the photo of a cat to the laundry symbol of cat. The third point, we're going to teach segmenting and blending with letters. Our words are made up of sounds called phonemes. An essential skill is building phonemic awareness of the sounds in words, an ability to manipulate those sounds. Segmenting is breaking the sounds of a word apart. Blending is putting sounds together to make a word. Segmenting is the core skill for spelling. Blending is the core skill for reading. We're going to be segmenting and blending with the movable alphabet. These are not decoding or encoding exercises. There's no expectation that the child already knows the letter sound correspondences. You are going to provide that information for them. In my book, I provide several lessons on how to do these sound games with letters and also with the auditory only exercises, which we'll get to. Phonemic awareness is a pre-reading activity that you can begin at the toddler age and continue as long as you like to or need to. I have a short video to show you an example of these lessons. This is p and this is ah. What is this? P, ah, pa. This is ah and this is p. What is this? Ah, p, op. If this is op and this is t, what is this? T, op, top. If this is top, what is this? T. If this is top, what is this? P. Let's change top into pop. P, a, p, pop. We're going to use letters instead of auditory-only phonemic awareness activities. Auditory only is not harmful. You should do them, and if you're not doing them, please add them into your practice. But they shouldn't be your only phonemic awareness activity, because phonemic awareness is very difficult. It's the cognitive load demanded by letterless phonemic awareness is really high, especially when you get into phoneme manipulation where you swap out sounds. So change I in pig to aw, hog. What is clink without ng? Click. Most children can't do that in their head, and the letters offload that cognitive demand. Point 4, teach a single sound and how it is spelled. This is the most common kind of phonics instruction I come across, word families. This method goes by a lot of names: rhyme analogy, part word decoding, chunking, blends, but they're all fundamentally the same. Words are taught in groups with similar chunks. Here I have pictured the at family. When you teach this way, you're fusing two sounds, at, into one unit. At, spelled AT. In the child's mind, it becomes an indivisible piece. So the child is being taught to see the words like this: at, b, at, at, as if there's only two sounds in the word, not three separate sounds. K, at. You have to teach each sound and its spelling separately. If you teach them to look for chunks and word parts, they will. I had a real student who was taught this method at public school, and this was a real mistake he made. He saw the sight word go and the family chunk at, and he read this word go at. What we must do is only group letters together that really go together, like OA to represent the sound O here. Teach each spelling and its sound separately. Grouping letters together that do not represent a single sound is needlessly confusing. There are very few words in English that actually belong to any kind of family, but there are a lot of letters that work together to represent a single sound. English can have words that have 2, 3, or 4 letters representing a single sound. Some programs call these phonograms. You're going to see a lot of this when you're out looking for curriculum materials. It's a balanced literacy practice that has permeated the phonics space. It's not backed by science, and results are only marginally better using this method than whole word methods. You can teach consonant blends, but teach them mixed up. Instead of a list of all words, have tr, sk, sm, all mixed together. You can have words that have rhyming endings, but mix them up. So you can have ats and ams and ets all together. You don't want the child to accidentally fuse those into an indivisible piece. The first 4 points are probably the most important, so I'm going to do a quick review. When we teach in confusing ways that aren't speech to print, the child learns that the code is unnecessarily confusing. Word families attempt to fuse individual sounds together, whether they should be or not. The child will look for these groups because they've been taught to. So we have tent and tenth. But if the child's been taught to look for the nt family, oh, look, there's an nt. They're going to make a mistake. Sight words is memorizing words as a shape. The individual letters aren't distinct. So they'll see them as just this shape. It's not distinct, and they make strange mistakes. Silent letters is teaching from print to speech. The letters make sound, but sometimes they don't, which makes some of these letters superfluous. Why do we need them? English is already a very difficult code. Our best chance at helping all of our children learn to read is to make it as simple as we can. Point 5, we're going to teach handwriting. Handwriting is an essential skill, even in our age of ubiquitous technology. We write quick notes and grocery lists. I personally keep a paper planner, and I handwrite all of my rough drafts. I think better on paper. Writing with a pen is easy and convenient. You can write anytime and anywhere. To deny our children this skill is really a disservice. More importantly, for our purposes, handwriting is the most efficient way to build the sound to symbol mental connection. In studies where they compared typing to writing, the children who handwrote learned to read faster and with fewer errors. I don't think there are particularly any differences in learning outcomes for print versus cursive, but I land firmly on the cursive side anyway. With practice, I think cursive is a more ergonomic motion for the hand, which reduces fatigue. With practice, I think it's also more legible. It eliminates letter reversals like B and D, and it clearly separates words while clearly connecting letters within a word. I'm a big fan of cursive, but if a child is already writing in print, there's no need to change. They can learn cursive later if wanted. We are not going to do pseudo writing. There is no evidence to support these practices. They don't seem to be harmful, but they do not help the child learn to read, write, or spell. These activities at best introduce some visual memory for letter shapes, but the evidence is very weak on that front. I think at worst, they're a time waster. These activities are totally divorced from how reading and writing actually work. We want to be building kinesthetic memory with the motion of creating the letter. And we want to be spelling and word building, not shape matching. The movable alphabet is used for spelling while the child is still building up the fine motor skills and stamina for writing with a pen. It's only a gray area for elementary age students. It's completely appropriate and encouraged for very young children. You'll want to encourage the use of a pen as soon as the child seems ready. Typing should be reserved for after penmanship and reading is somewhat mastered. Remember, typing will make it take longer for a child to learn how to spell and read. For both the movable alphabet and typing, you are still encoding words, so it hits the essential of writing. It's just a less efficient method. Point 6. We should bring explicit awareness to the child that reading and spelling are related activities. They're not separate areas of the language curriculum. Remember, reading and spelling are inverse operations. This would be like saying addition and subtraction are totally different areas of the math curriculum instead of teaching them as inverse operations. We're going to explicitly link spelling and reading in 2 ways. First, teach reading and spelling at the same time by spelling a word and then reading it back. And especially for an elementary age student, tell them what they're learning. If the child's very young, you may need to simplify the language, but for an elementary age student, I would say, hey, you're learning to write a code and you can read coded language. You're a code breaker. Maybe tie it to a spy book that they're reading or talk about code breakers from history. They love that. And it really appeals to the second plane child. The alternate that we're going to avoid, if the word appears without a child spelling it out, encoding it, then the work is not following the Montessori method of reading instruction. It's not speech to print. It divorces spelling and reading because the child didn't spell the word first. For these popsicle sticks, the child isn't actually spelling. That would be encoding the sounds of spoken language. I would see a student just using the picture of the cat to make, a proper image, and then they would see a word appeared and then say, oh, that must be cat. I'm very doubtful that this activity would actually induce the child to sound out k, a, t, and instead they would be visually memorizing the word as a whole. The see, build, read, this, they see it, they build it by visually matching the letters, not sounding them out, and then they would decode the word, which would be print to speech. Do not teach letter names first. If students are taught sounds are represented by letters and they are given explicit training on sound letter relationships, it reduces the learning time to decode words by half compared to groups that learned letter names first. What would you do if it took half as long to teach the children basic reading? Skip letter names. We can learn them later. What we're going to do? We're going to give explicit training on sound letter relationships. We're going to say the sound and connect it to the letter. We're not going to confuse them with unnecessary information. Letter names are unnecessary to an emergent reader. What we're not going to do is focus on the names, right? We're not going to have a letter of the week. They don't need to learn the alphabet song until later, and we're not going to spell out loud. At the beginning, we're going to expect phonetically accurate spelling. The movable alphabet in this image is ideal because there's a unique symbol for each sound of English. So there are 40 sounds of English, but we only have 26 letters. So in this movable alphabet, there are 40 sounds and 40 symbols. Later, you can learn correct spelling. What we're not going to do is accept non-letters as writing. Remember, writing as encoding, which includes squiggles and pictures. So if they drew a comic with no words, that's not writing. That's a comic, and it could be great, but it's not writing. And then the letter name alphabetic stage only exists if you teach them letter names first. We're not going to teach letter names first, so we're going to completely skip this honestly debunked stage. And this other picture that I have here, I wasn't quite sure what category to put this under, but this seemed like a good spot. English is a complicated writing system, and moving to correct spelling is hard. It takes years to master correct spelling. Even good spellers have words that they always struggle with. My words are definitely and accommodate. I can't spell those words. I keep trying. This worksheet has children choose the correct spelling out of a list of intentionally misspelled words. To the best of your ability, only expose children to examples of correct spelling so they can learn what correct spelling looks like. How to move from phonetic spelling to correct spelling is like another hour-long presentation, and I'm sorry I can't go into it more now. On an earlier slide, I said that an explicit scope and sequence was a necessary element of an evidence-based reading instruction, and that the original Montessori method didn't use one. This is because Italian is a much easier language to read and write than English, so order didn't particularly matter. The guide would be able to follow the interest of the child and teach letter sound correspondences in any old order. English is one of the most complicated written languages, so we must use a scope and sequence. And the scope and sequence needs to be made by someone who understands the complexities of English. I have provided a scope and sequence for you in your attendee packet, and it's also available for free on my website, and of course it's included in my book. If you make Montessori materials, my program is meant to be open source. You can freely make materials that match my scope and sequence or use the lessons in my book. My goal is to help every child learn to read, and I think together we can start a movement that does that. The key thing I want you to look out for are leveled readers. That little red box on the bottom, that's the first little reader set. It is a bestseller on Amazon under phonics instruction. There's a book in there called Birthday Surprise. That is not an appropriate book for an emergent reader who is still trying to figure out the cat on the mat. And if you look at the ocean page, first of all, ocean, that's not an emergent reader word. There's a single dot under each word because the child is meant to recognize the words visually as a whole, and they're definitely using the picture as a guessing prompt. So there are 3 fish, and there's a photo of 3 fish. That's how these methods work. So I want you to avoid leveled readers. As part of our scope and sequence, we're going to teach the entire code of English. There's more than one way to spell every sound in English. And as part of the scope and sequence, you should teach the most common spelling alternatives. The Dwyer reading folders do this in a non-systematic way, which is one of the reasons I didn't use that program, but it does include spelling alternatives from speech to print, which is the correct way. So I think Dwyer's fairly good. You're also going to need to teach strategies for multi-syllable words. And really all you want to do is just not stop. Keep learning. Don't stop at the 26 alphabet letters. You can't just teach 26 sounds and the 26 single letters that represent them? What about sh and ch and ooh? We need to teach all of the sounds and all of the spellings. So after a basic spelling is learned for each sound, you'll move on to alternative spellings, and then you move on to word study. I spent about 2 years reading about evidence-based reading instruction, and I distilled what I learned into my book, and I also have some book recommendations for you. My book is called The Rhyme and Reason Reading Program, Evidence-Based Reading Instruction for the Montessori Classroom. This book is meant to be a how-to manual. It's for teachers in a classroom. It's not very theoretical. I tried not to be too theoretical. The book includes everything you need to teach. There's theory, so you know why you're doing things. I wanted you to be able to make informed decisions to tailor your lessons to the needs of your children. There are scripted Montessori lessons with suggestions for follow-up work. The program was designed for elementary age students, ages 6 to 12, because there are big stories and etymologies that really appeal to the second plane child. But the core methodology is the Montessori method, which was designed for primary age children. So you'll be able to use it, but you'll need to simplify the language on your own. The physical copy of the guidebook is available on Amazon or as an ebook on my website. The materials are sold separately, and they include all of the card materials, booklets, and 56 decodable readers. You can buy PDFs of the material or a physical book on Amazon, but you have to cut all the pages apart. And again, if you make Montessori materials, let's work together. Our shared goal is to help every child learn to read. Let's do it. Montessori is cited in reading research as a pioneer in the field, but outside of Montessori circles, nobody refers to this kind of reading instruction as the Montessori method. So when you are doing your own independent research, you're going to want to look for speech to print or linguistic phonics. There are a handful of programs out there that meet all of the criteria that I mentioned in this talk. And the programs on this page are ones that I have personally used in classroom and remedial settings before I made my own program. I think they're probably ideal for homeschooling environment because they're designed for one-on-one teaching, which didn't meet my needs for a full class, and that's why I made my own program. There's also a really lovely Facebook group that I pop into sometimes. They'll be a great resource for you if you want to dig in more and find a community of parents and teachers using linguistic phonics programs. There are a small number of Montessorians there, and it's mostly homeschoolers. Folks there have experience with linguistic phonic programs that I have not used, so you'll have more options and resources and recommendations if you go to that group. It's not my group, so tell Nikki I sent you. For further book recommendations, I think everyone should read The Discovery of the Child, particularly chapters 14 through 17. This is where Maria Montessori explains her reading program, how it developed, her trials, her errors, her successes. It's nice. It's a good read. Why Our Children Can't Read by Diane McGinnis. This book is written for general audiences, and it's a really good primer on evidence-based reading instruction, how writing systems work. The work of Diane McGinnis was immeasurably influential on my thinking and my research and my life. Spell It Out by David Crystal is a very entertaining book. You could modify some of the chapters in this book to become stories for an elementary classroom, and it talks about how we got such a weird writing system. Like, why is English so weird? He talks about it. It's really entertaining. If you're a nerd like me, you should read Early Reading Instruction by Diane McGinnis. This is a technical book. There are statistics and charts. She goes into the research, the statistical analysis. If you like that kind of reading, it's a very good book. If that sounds really boring to you, I still think it's a good book, but maybe start with Why Our Children Can't Read. And then Dictionary of the British English Spelling System. This book's available for free online, and it helped me develop my scope and sequence and develop the basic code for my reading program. So this was a book that I drew on heavily for my research. And if you're interested in the spelling patterns of English, this would be a great resource for you. All right. Thanks for listening to my talk. I hope you got some good information to bring into your class and teach your children. I hope you feel confident focusing on what really matters in reading education. So thanks for listening. Bye.